Hello, students. Welcome to the ninth lecture of the text. The lesson that we were doing is The Enemy. Our author is Pearl S. Buck. Now, we have already completed 8 lectures, and in our last lecture, that is in the 8th lecture, we had seen that Dr. Sadao visits General Takima and informs him of the presence of an enemy sailor in his house. The general assures to see that no harm occurs to Dr. Sadao, and the reason is that Dr. Sadao was very essential for his health. He could not trust any other doctor but Sadao. So he promises to send assassins and get the enemy murdered in silence. So Dr. Sadao returns home feeling assured, but some way or the other he could not come to terms with the fact that the man would be assassinated. Yet he was relieved from one side that he doesn't have to get involved. He also realizes that leaders like General Takima, men in power, they keep goons or assassins in order to see that their authority is not questioned. So today in our 9th lecture, let us see what happens next. He refused to allow anything but reason to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. So it can be understood that the young man, the American sailor who worked for the US Navy, he was slowly recovering and he was much better than his previous condition, and he was back on his feet and he looked quite strong. He had awakened quite early and he was getting ready to move out into the garden. And Sadao had not expected that. He had just entered the room with that heavy mind after having returned from the general's house, and his point of focus was how the general would get this man assassinated. But however, don't you think that it is Dr. Sadao's, there is this kind and sympathetic soul in Dr. Sadao which constantly was concerned about the well-being of his patient. This man whom he treated, though he was an American, he could never see him or accept him as an enemy. Despite his racial prejudice, he was also prejudiced against the Americans or white people. But still, while treating this American, Dr. Sadao could not accept or rather consider him to be his enemy. For him, the American was only a patient. So, while he returned from General Takima's palace, he tried to reason out. He tried to console himself, tried to reason out that whatever decision the general had taken, that is beneficial for him, for his family, as well as for the nation. So though he was troubled, though he was disturbed knowing that the man would be assassinated, and that too with his help, he some way or the other he tried to suppress his agitation and tried to react very calmly. So as he opened the door, he found that the young man, he was out of bed, and he looked very fit and very fine. "What is it?" he exclaimed. "Who gave you permission to leave your room?" "I am not used to waiting for permission," Tom said gaily. Okay, now who is Tom? You might be questioning. Tom is the name of the American sailor. So we come to know for the first time that the man's name is Tom. And the doctor, he was quite angry seeing that the man had got up on his feet without waiting for the suggestion from, or rather the advice of his doctor, the man who is treating. And when he questions that why are you standing up or why are you trying to get out of your bed, I have not given you permission yet. Tom, being a man working for army or working for defense, he very gaily, in a very strong and active manner, he retorts back that I am a person who is not used to waiting for permission. I'm not waiting for permission. I don't want any permission from a man like you. Okay, I'm not used to listening to orders, especially from a enemy. Once again, okay, from an enemy, from an enemy nation. Gosh, I feel pretty good again. But will the muscles on this side always feel stiff? He is having some trouble with the stitch that he had just below his kidney. Okay, so he was feeling very stiff. Actually, this is something that people who have undergone operation actually complain about, the stiffness of the muscle. If there is a strain that is being felt, your muscle are not relaxed easily. Okay, so maybe that same stiffness he was also feeling, Tom was also feeling, and he questions that is that condition going to persist forever, continue forever or not, right? Anyway, he was feeling pretty good, he says. Is it so? Sadao inquired, surprised. So like a doctor, the doctor, on hearing the problem that his patient was hearing, Tom was having, Dr. Sadao, he inquires. He forgot all else. Once again, he had forgotten that just a few minutes earlier, he had been to the general's palace. They have discussed how to remove the enemy from his house. Okay, he had forgotten about the plan that has been that has been enacted, or rather on the way to get enacted. And once again he comes into his role of a very professional doctor. Now I thought I had provided against that, he murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at the healing scar. Massage may do it, he said, if exercise does not. So he had probably provided some kind of ointment so that the muscle or the stiffness is removed. But then somehow or the other, he again advises that you can try some exercise or a slight massage on that scar. Scar is the wound, the mark that is left after the operation. If you massage slightly on that part, it may work if exercise does not work. Okay, this is the advice that Dr. Sadao offers him. It won't bother me much, the young man said. So this is simply stress. I don't mind it much. He's referring to the the strain that he was feeling on that particular scar or the stitch. He says that it won't bother or trouble him much because he's used to taking up that pain, because being a person in defense, in army, in navy, he is trained to bear pain. So we can understand how tough built this man was. His young face was gaunt under the stubbly blonde beard. Say, doctor, I have got something I want to say to you. If I hadn't met a Jap like you means a Japanese like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that. So, for the first time, we can understand that Tom is grateful towards Dr. Sadao. And he too knows it very clearly that most of the Japanese, they are ruthless, just like the Germans. And if it was not for Dr. Sadao, then by now he would have been dead. It is only because Dr. Sadao was a kind, considerate, and very generous person that he is alive. Okay, so he is full of gratitude towards the Japanese doctor. Sadao bowed, but he could not speak. See, look at the situation, the mental state of Dr. Sadao. He bowed. Bowed means how? Why he bowed? In order to accept, as a sign of respect. He accepts the gratefulness or gratitude that is being, or rather the thanks that is being offered to him by the American sailor, but at the same time he could not accept it thoroughly or fully. That is why he could not speak. Why he could not speak? Because just a few minutes back, just a couple of minutes back, he had worked out, he had let the general of the army know that an enemy was there, and very soon the general was about to send assassins and get the man murdered. Okay, so that is why his heart was so heavy, he was feeling so guilty that he could not speak out. Sure, I know that. Tom went on warmly. Tom, on the other hand, feeling very relaxed in the presence of Dr. Sadao, because Dr. Sadao was not like the other normal Japanese that he has met earlier. His big thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. So knuckles, you can understand, the joints of the fingers. Okay, that is called the knuckles. And when you might have noticed, and when you grip something very tight or very fast, then what happens? The blood on the edge of the knuckles, it drains out and it looks very white and pale. And it was more white in the case of the American because he had already lost much blood. Okay, so his hands, his knuckles, it appeared bloodless and white when he gripped a chair very firmly, maybe trying to get up or stand up properly on his feet. And Sadao, he was noticing all these minute facts about his patient. I guess if all the Japs were like you, there would not have been a war. So it's very, very important remark made by Tom, or this enemy, that if all the Japanese people, not only Japanese people, actually we can also draw it or extend it slightly further, that if all the people of the world were as sympathetic, as humanitarian, as compassionate and understanding as Dr. Sadao, then maybe there won't have been any war or any reason for fighting a war, combating a war, right? So this is something missing. If you have done or you are going to do this poem by Pablo Neruda, Keeping Quiet, why it is necessary to have some kind of calmness, some kind of why it is necessary to keep peace. It's a very, very important, very beautiful poem on wars, the adversities of war, and why it is necessary to think. Okay, so here Tom is also thinking. Okay, and this few minutes or maybe a couple of hours of thought, it has reflected upon him the idea that if all the people of the world, at least all the Japanese at the present situation, the war was going on between the Japanese and the Americans, so if at least the Japanese were as compassionate as Dr. Sadao, then probably the war would not have been waged. There would not have been bloodshed. There would not have been so much brutality all around. Right? Perhaps, Sadao said with difficulty. Sadao said with difficulty because uh, again that guilt coming back to his mind, that he had agreed to keep the partitions open and allow the assassins enter and murder Tom. And now I think you had better go back to bed. Don't need to take some stress, just go back to your bed. This is something that Sadao advises Tom. He helped the boy back into bed and then bawled, "Good night," he said. Okay, so said good night and asked him to take rest for the day. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sound of a twig broken, or a stone displaced in the garden. A noise such as man might make who carried a burden. Remember what the general had asked Dr. Sadao? That you keep the partitions open so that my assassins can enter. I will be sending men, and if you keep the partitions open towards your garden, what will happen? They would be able to enter the room of the white man and murder him, assassinate him silently. And they would also remove the body. Now, a man like Dr. Sadao, who has never been involved in such things, he was really, really terrified, worried, tensed. It is somewhere or the other his conscience, it was telling him that, this is something very, very wrong. And the entire night he could not sleep. He was so restless, thinking that this moment, the next moment, the man would enter and kill. Could he hear rustling of footsteps? He was thinking if he could hear footsteps, people walking silently, creeping into the bedroom, or if he was hearing the stones and twigs turning and making sound as if somebody is walking past his garden. Okay, when people step onto the stone or maybe a twig is broken. Okay, he even heard as if somebody is carrying and dragging a burden, as if the man's body is, or the corpse, the dead body of Tom is being removed, is being pulled by somebody, dragged through the garden. He was hearing all those sounds. He was in fact hallucinating. He was so terrified after hearing the plan, and every moment he feared that the plan might be executed. Okay, and that is why he could not sleep well. He slept very badly that night, and he kept on waking up again and again. The next morning, he made the excuse to go first into the guest room. Why? Because he was eager to know what happened to Tom. If the American were gone, he then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that there on the pillow was the shaggy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep, and he closed the door again quietly. Remember, he had promised himself that he would not let Hannah know about this plan, okay, until and unless the plan is completely executed. Now that is why he rushed to the room to see if Tom has been removed from his room, guest room, or not. Okay, and then maybe if Tom is removed, he would let Hannah know that it was carried out under the instructions of the general. Okay, but to his surprise, when he went into the guest room, what did he see? He saw that Tom, the American, he was fast asleep, and he was sleeping very peacefully. He was breathing quietly. Look at the sympathy of this man. How sympathetic and kind-hearted and concerned a man was Dr. Sadao. He closed the door again quietly without disturbing the peaceful sleep of this man who was his patient. He is asleep, he told Hannah. He's almost well to sleep like that. What shall we do with him? Hannah whispered. Okay, so Hannah, she is constantly worried. The same question comes back to her mind. So Hannah whispered her old refrain. Refrain means her repeated question. This is one question she has been asking over and over again to Sadao, that what shall we do with him? Okay, and Sadao shook his head. I must decide in a day or two, he promised. So he promised Hannah that I will do something, you need not worry. But he is tensed inside because within a day or two, the general was sure to send men, because that has been promised by the general that he would be sending men. And so he lets Hannah know that you don't worry, it would be decided within a day or two. But certainly he thought the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending boughs and whistling partitions. Bending boughs, when people enter through, enter from below tree branches, there is a slight bending sound, the sound that is made due to the bending of branches. Boughs means branches. And whistling partitions, whistling, the sound made due to the rustling or the breeze entering an open partition. The whistling sound made by wind, breeze that enters through the open windows. So he was listening. He was so cautious and he was very alert, listening to each and every sound that he could hear. Hannah woke too. Okay, so hearing this sound, Hannah also woke up. Ought we not go and close the sick man's partition? She asked. Hannah, once again showing her sense of concern, her sympathetic soul, her love and humanity. Once again, she is also concerned that if it is too windy, it's good to shut the partition, right? So she also wakes up along with Sadao, and she asks him that whether they should go and shut down the partition which are open in the sick man's room. No, Sadao said, he is able now to do it for himself. Sadao refuses, and we know why he has refused to do so, because he had been instructed by the general to keep the partitions open. But the next morning, the American was still there. To his surprise, the American was not gone. The man did not come that night also. The assassins did not arrive. And the American, he was still alive. Then the third night, of course, must be the night. He was just expecting day after day as the days were passing by. He was just calculating this day, the next day, the next day. But the day didn't arrive. The night did not arrive. Then the third night, of course, must be the night. So had the general promised. Then the wind changed to quiet rain, and the garden was full of sound of dripping eaves and running springs. So it was raining very heavily, at that night, and eaves or the edge of the roofs, it was dripping with raindrops, and the garden, it was filled with running springs. The rainwater collected in the garden and flowing into small tiny springs. Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. But suddenly, he was sleeping good. He was quite fast asleep, but suddenly he woke up because he heard the sound of a crash, something broken, some sound outside into the garden, and he stood up on his feet. What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. I must go and see. Hannah insisted that she must go and see what was happening, what was that sound. but he held her and would not let her move. Very strange behavior by Dr. Sadao, because Dr. Sadao, by now he was sure that the assassins, it is maybe the sound of the people entering the room, and something must be going on with Tom. Maybe he has been murdered by now. So he did not want Hannah to know what was actually going on. So that is why he insisted. He stopped her, he held her hand and did not let her move out. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Why are you behaving so odd? Don't go, he muttered. Don't go. I'm telling you, I'm begging you, please don't go. His terror infected her, and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together, they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. The way Sadao was terrorized, it was very much visible on his face and his behavior, the way he was holding her hand very tight. Sadao's attitude, Sadao's behavior surprised Hannah, and she was also panicking. She was also gasping. She was breathless, waiting for his response. But neither could speak anything. There was only silence. They did not speak to one another. Once again, they entered the bed with the baby between them. Yet, when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was the young man. To his surprise, he had expected that by now the man might have been already removed, but it was not so. The assassins did not arrive that night also. The third night it was, and he had expected that by the third night the plan would be executed, but nothing like that happened. Rather, he found that he was very gay. Very gay means very happy, and had already washed and was now on his feet. The man, the white man, he was Tom. He was looking very happy, looking very healthy, strong, and he was standing very straight on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself. So his beard, it has been cleaned. He has clean shaved himself. And today there was a faint color in his cheeks. So blood returning to his body. Okay, and his cheeks, it appeared slightly pinkish in color. I'm well, he said joyously. Sadao had visited that room with a different expectation. But then Tom feels that it is maybe he was coming to inquire after his health. He had so much of trust upon Dr. Sadao by now that he could not but think positively about Dr. Sadao. So he immediately informs, I'm well, I'm good. Sadao drew his kimono round his weary body. He could not. He decided suddenly go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life. No, simply it was not worth the strain. Sadao suddenly felt very, very exhausted, very, very tired. He's very, very with what? He hasn't done anything, a tough job or hard labor, but he's weary because he's mentally tired, he's fatigued. Okay, he cannot carry out through another night. He had already bore enough. He cannot bear the tension anymore. Every night it has been a restless night, sleepless night. He has been waking up in the middle of the night. Okay, along with him, Hannah, she is also disturbed. So, all the concern, all his thoughts centering around this white man, and what for? It's not worth the strain. It's something that he should not have been thinking about, because this man doesn't matter to him anymore, or even the slightest. Okay, so that is why he feels that something must be done. He is not ready to go through another tensed night yet. Okay, so what does Dr. Sadao do? That we have to see, that too in our next class. I suppose you have understood this much. If you have any doubts, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.